Responsive and Rested Mama Show. I'm your host, Andrea Fallon, midwife, child health nurse, NDC practitioner, holistic sleep coach, and mum of two. And today I'm going to be talking to you about food and sleep. And this has been quite a popular topic, actually. I do have a free guide that goes with this show today. So if you haven't got a copy, do post in the comments or post in the event, and I will get that to you, because I think it is a bit easier sometimes just to read when it comes to these kind of things, particularly when I'm talking about specific foods, so you don't have to try and remember anything. But I think that it's an important topic, because when we're considering sleep, we need to look at the big picture. We need to look at all the pieces of the puzzle, and this is one piece of the puzzle, and something that isn't really talked about an awful lot in terms of how it impacts sleep, because as you know, the mainstream sleep advice and that mainstream approach really heavily focuses on settling techniques, bad habits, and encouraging independent sleep as not only the solution to your sleep problems, but also as that's the pushed as the root cause of sleep challenges, rather than looking at sleep as a biological function of the body. And so yeah, why would it consider things like food? When we take a holistic approach and we see sleep as a biological function of the body, and see that actually, we need to look at what's going on in the body if we're going to address sleep challenges, then it changes our whole perspective, and suddenly food becomes a part of that. Because one of the main points that I'm going to cover today is actually, how is food impacting those biological sleep regulators? So I think a lot of the time when it comes to food, we think that the macronutrients are the most important and influential part of it. So the macronutrients are carbohydrates, protein, fat. They are what, I guess the big components of food, I guess you could say, like the energy sources within food. That's like what's giving us the energy. And it's the micronutrients and the other parts within food that actually are driving the support to our body's processes and what's impacting the sleep regulators. So I'm going to give examples of that today, and I'm going to go into that today. But please let me know if you've got any questions in the comments so that I can come back to them. And I also just want to say, before we get into it too far, that obviously, I'm not a nutritionist or dietitian. I'm talking very generally in terms of nutrition, and I'm talking in terms of specifically how it impacts the sleep regulators, which is my field of expertise. But yes, I'm not here to give you very specific nutrition advice, and if you are worried about that kind of thing, then I would suggest seeking out one of those professionals. But today I am going to talk more generally about how food impacts sleep. So as I said, a lot of the time people are thinking things like, oh, my little one's on solids, maybe they're not having enough protein. Maybe I need to give them like a higher protein meal at dinner time or something like that. But the research doesn't really support a lot of these ideas that are out there. And one of the big ideas when it comes to feeding, of course, with babies is, oh, give them the bottle of milk, formula before bed so they sleep longer. And then it's that same kind of idea carries over as they get older, like, oh, just stuff them full of food basically so they don't wake up hungry. And, that's how food impacts sleep. There's a lot more to it than that. And I just want to, I guess, bust that myth a little bit. If we think about, ourselves at Christmas time is a good example. Maybe we've had a really big Christmas dinner or a big Christmas lunch, and then we get really sleepy after, because our body is sending extra blood flow down to our stomach. There's a lot of concentration going on for the body with digestion, and we get very sleepy. And we might fall asleep, but is that actually going to help us sleep? Not really. I mean, probably more than likely we're actually going to wake up after a short time with a bit of a stomach ache and be really uncomfortable because we're so full. So we don't want to be doing that to our little ones, and that's not really going to be helping sleep in the long term. So put that idea out of your mind, the whole stuff them till they're full kind of idea, not really having the biggest impact on sleep. Sure, if your little one over the course of the 24 hours is not taking in enough and they're not feeling satiated, then yes, we're looking at, getting more in, but it wouldn't be so much like get more in the last meal of the day. We maybe need to look over the course of the day. Instead, what we're looking at, and something I don't think is spoken about all that often to mums, is that these nutrients that are within our food actually can impact the sleep regulators. So we've got two sleep regulators. We've got the circadian rhythm and we've got the sleep-wake homeostat, and that's what is controlling our sleep and how well we sleep. And those systems can be influenced and impacted by the nutrients that we take in. So the first one that I see as the main nutrient or deficiency of that impacts sleep is iron. And I've actually unfortunately seen this quite a bit recently with toddlers. We've come across quite a few iron deficient toddlers, and it has impacted their sleep. So we're not actually sure why iron deficiency, or how it impacts sleep, but it is associated with more wakes in the night, and that's for adults and little ones. But associated with more wakes in the night, it's thought that when you're low in iron, your sleep cycles actually change. And so that is why, it causes some changes to the sleep cycles themselves, and that's why you see more frequent wakes. But nevertheless, iron deficiency is a big one. B12, vitamin B12 deficiency, similar impact on the body, and similar reasons why. Magnesium, you've probably heard about magnesium. A lot of people will say that, if you're having trouble sleeping, take a bath with the magnesium salts in it, or use the spray, because it helps with muscle relaxation, it helps with sleep, and it does also help with those sleep stages, much like iron and vitamin B12, and it also helps our circadian clock. And a lot of people are deficient in magnesium. Our bodies use a lot of magnesium, and so we actually need to get quite a lot out of our food, and sometimes food is not, if food quality is quite poor, it's not very high in magnesium. Calcium is another one. So calcium actually is the precursor. It helps our bodies use it to make melatonin, and melatonin is a sleep hormone. So if we're deficient in calcium, we're going to have trouble with making the melatonin to help with sleep. And also tryptophan. I'm never sure if I'm saying that right. That is an amino acid that's also a precursor to melatonin. Now that is found in foods. Turkey is a really high one, and that's why people talk about feeling sleepy after a Christmas dinner in particular, is that it's the tryptophan, or however you say it, in the turkey. So that's one that's also found in some foods, and I'll go into that shortly. And then melatonin itself. And I didn't actually know this until very recently, but melatonin is found in cherries. So actually, if you eat cherries or drink tart cherry juice, that actually has melatonin in it. Melatonin is a sleep, is a compound that helps with sleep. So those are the main smaller nutrients that are found in foods that can really impact our sleep regulation system within the body. And as I said, the main one I particularly see in toddlers and sometimes infants is iron deficiency. So that brings us to, what foods do we want to have then that contain these nutrients, and what do we want to avoid? So in the case of iron, the main reason why a little one can end up iron deficient, so their iron stores start to drop from 6 months, and that's why we start to add in iron-rich foods with solids. And our breast milk, if you're breastfeeding, your breast milk, you know, it just doesn't have enough to meet their needs from 6 months. It doesn't have enough iron. Formula often has a lot of extra iron added in. Anything called gold, you know, like gold whatever, has extra iron in, but it can sometimes have a constipating effect, so that's something to be mindful of. But we need to have these iron-rich foods. Now, what happens is sometimes little ones just don't take a lot of iron-rich foods in for whatever reason. They're a little bit picky. Maybe with baby-led weaning, they might actually, you know, have lots of small bits of things, but just not actually take in enough. Or sometimes it's about an absorption issue. So sometimes, and especially with like, this is more the toddlers, is if they're actually taking in too much milk, then that can, firstly, it makes them feel so full they don't want a lot of food. But secondly, the calcium content in milk blocks iron coming in and being absorbed. So calcium, we don't want to take high calcium foods with high iron foods because calcium will stop iron from being absorbed properly. So we don't want a little one over 1 year old to have much more than 500 mils of milk a day, because then we might see some issues with iron absorption, and then and I'm talking cow's milk, and then the problem is, you know, we're going to have issues with iron absorption, and we could end up with an iron deficiency that's going to lead to sleep issues. In terms of other things that block iron absorption is we have to be mindful of reflux medication as well. So a lot of people don't know this, but reflux medication also blocks the absorption of iron. So if your little one is still on reflux, anti-reflux medication, you know, as they're getting towards like the end of that first year, then we just really want to be mindful. Try and space that from your iron-rich foods. So those are the main things around iron. Obviously, iron-rich foods, I think most people are pretty familiar with, but red meat is your biggest one. That's got the most available iron, you know, for absorption. Vegetarian options still can have quite a good amount of iron, but it's not as easily absorbed by the body. So things like spinach, you know, they can be quite high in iron, but the body, it's harder for the body to absorb it. So having something that's high in vitamin C, like an orange juice, when you take those iron-rich foods, can be helping the body to absorb that iron. So if you haven't got my guide, I do run through in the guide some of these foods and things to be mindful of. So that's iron. Let's talk a bit about some of the other foods that have those nutrients that I was talking about. So almonds, I mean, this is going to be a bit challenging. You know, we want to try and introduce nuts fairly early on, but maybe not, you know, we don't want to go to extremes with nuts either and give them so much. So with almonds and little ones, obviously you're not going to give them a whole nut, but maybe you might make up like an almond paste. You could, you know, like instead of peanut butter, use almond butter. That's high in calcium and that tryptophan that I was talking about. So that's going to help with the melatonin at nighttime. Bananas, they're great for the tryptophan and the magnesium, which helps with sleep. So even a banana later in the day or in the evening might be helpful. Cherries, like I said, actually contain melatonin. Kiwi fruit, that's actually high in serotonin, which helps with sleep. And like I said, spinach is a good one for iron, as long as you have some vitamin C with it to help. Sweet potato, that can also be really helpful with sleep. And turkey, like I mentioned, can also help with that, you know, precursor helping with melatonin production. So those are some of the foods. If you go through the guide, I actually have a few recipes there, and things that you can try. So what foods can make sleep worse? Anything that causes like a tummy upset, obviously. For a little one, we don't want like a high fat, you know, really high fat foods in terms of like our bad fats, you know, like a whole heap of like greasy chips, for example. Of course, lots of little ones like chips, but maybe don't give them like a huge lot of chips before bedtime. anything spicy or really sugary, anything too high protein that's just the protein and nothing much else, that's going to be harder for their little bodies to digest. Dried fruit is another one that can cause quite a bit of gas in the tummy, so that might cause some discomfort. So anything that's potentially going to cause discomfort is going to potentially cause a sleep issue. And like I said, just being mindful of the things that that you might be giving that actually make it harder for the body to digest the essential nutrients. So being mindful of the timings of things. And also, I mean, obviously we're not really going to give our little ones caffeine, but to be mindful for your own sleep. Aged cheese and tomatoes are actually high in a natural stimulant. So, I mean, again, I don't know too many babies and toddlers that would be eating aged cheese, but maybe you do that. Tomatoes, yeah, sometimes we can make really foods with a lot of tomato. That might be something just to be mindful of. And those are really the main kind of foods that we want to avoid. Let me know in the comments if you have any specific questions related to foods or any questions so far. Cool. So the other thing that I wanted to talk about today was really the common signs that food might be impacting your little one's sleep. Like, how do I know if it's food? The first thing is obviously like allergies and intolerances. If your little one's got a food allergy, they're going to be quite uncomfortable. That could be impacting their sleep at night. And the main way that's going to show itself to you is through their bowel motions. If they've got blood in their poo, that always needs to be investigated. Sometimes mucus in the poo can be normal, but if it's a lot of mucus, again, you probably want to get that checked out by a doctor. And if they're really unsettled, but all of the other factors have been ruled out. So obviously you're going to need some medical input here to just rule out things like urinary tract infections, ear infections. You want to make sure feeding's going well if you're breastfeeding, and your little one's not really having solids. Obviously this whole show today is not so much for you, but there is a little bit for you in that, you want to make sure that your little one's not unsettled because of a feeding issue, like a breastfeeding issue, So you need to rule out those things before you just kind of go down, I'm going to start eliminating certain foods because it could be a food allergy or intolerance. Really need to explore the more common causes first. And then the main point is that this stuff here, I mean, it's great to make the tweaks and be mindful of, but we always come back to the sleep regulators. And so, yes, the foods might be impacting the sleep regulators, as I've been talking about. But if you've made all the adjustments for the sleep regulators first, often that sorts it out. So once you optimize your little one's sleep to make sure that their sleep pressure's good, that their circadian clock is not disrupted in any way, you've done all of that work, and then you're still experiencing excessive night waking, like hourly wakes, for example, maybe more often. I've had families recently where it has been anemia and it's been a case of, like at times half-hour wakes, and we're thinking, how on earth is this happening? Like, we've done everything for the sleep pressure and the circadian clock. And then that's where we've gone down the path of, right, think we need see the doctor, get the blood test, and it's been confirmed that there's an iron deficiency anemia going on. So once you I guess what I'm saying is that we look at foods, yes, we be mindful of all these nutritional aspects of things, but really it's how the food is also impacting the sleep regulators, and it's the sleep regulators we always need to look at first. So they are, 90% of the time what's going on is that we just haven't got it quite right with those sleep regulators. But if it's not that, it can be this nutritional impact on the sleep regulators. So I hope that makes sense. Let me know in the comments if you've had any sort of aha moment, or if there was something that you learned from this today that you didn't know before. Lisa says, for breastfeeding mums, how much would what mum eat impact bub once they're on solids? Look, it's a really good question. There is a lot of stuff that you see on social media where people are saying, I've gone on this elimination diet and I've cut out this and I've cut out that, and they think that, it's had a big impact. I don't think the research is quite there saying that it always does have such a big impact. It's really, it's really individual, isn't it? It's a bit of a hard question to answer. The food proteins do go through, and your little one is experiencing like exposure to those foods, but for the by and large, that for most, that is a good thing, and that's protective, and that's helping the baby to get exposure and generally prevent allergies and issues down the track. But obviously there will always be some that do develop allergies and intolerances, and unfortunately the way it is it's just so hard to test for these things unless it's a IgE allergy, so like an anaphylaxis type allergy where the signs are just so obvious. When it's more like non-IgE, maybe intolerance, there's no real test and it's really hard and it's trial and error, and that's where I think you just need a professional to be guiding you. And if it's just the feeding issue, then it would be go to a feeding team, so that's got a few different professionals who work in that capacity, or go to like a dietitian or someone who can guide you through and work with you to see what's going on. A very tricky area, and that's why it's so hard to get answers, because it's not like so easy to test what's going on. Cool. Let me know if you have any other questions, or if you don't have the guide, let me know and I'll send it to you, because I do, as I said, I have actual examples of foods that you can give, and it's all written down, and it's just a little bit easier to take in, I think, when we're talking about all these things, if you've got it written in front of you. But otherwise, that's all I really wanted to share today. And I will see you all next week. All right, bye.